Rd.
When we look at where we are talking about what it's called the International Health Regulation by the WHO, which is basically what would enable you to do the alert, we're still not meeting the minimum requirements for those regulations. So we are not there yet, but I guess there's, what I would just say that we have gained is an increased awareness.
And what has been the impact on health systems in the affected countries in West Africa? I remember earlier on in the epidemic, people saying maybe this will end up in the health systems being strengthened, but that doesn't seem to be happening at the moment.
People who have said that are somewhat quite naive. I think what we have to take stock of is the fact that in West Africa, the three most affected countries, there were more than 800 medical workers who were affected, and 500 of them died. So if we were just to take that as one variable, to replace this human resources workforce will take years. We know that how long it takes to train a doctor, how long it takes to train a nurse, so that will not happen overnight. So we would like to think that something happened, and then after that the world wakes up, and because of the guilt trip they're going to inject a lot of money in the system. But the reality is will be the human resources, and unless you have doctors, nurses, person that you need to run a hospital or clinic, you will not strengthen the healthcare system.
And the World Health Organization has received a lot of criticisms for its slow response to the epidemic after you at MSF had alerted them to it spreading in early 2014. How much of that criticism has been fair, do you think? Were they equipped to do more about it? Do they have the resources? Do they have the power?
The WHO failed to step up to its role as being the authority in terms of calling medical emergency or international concern at the right time. Calling it earlier will have alert the whole world that something is happening and everybody needs to pay attention, and then it will have follow-up afterwards.
Do they have the power to get the world to take notice?
There is no other organization that have the authority or the legitimacy to call for a public health emergency or international emergency. For 6 months, Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières trying to alert the world, and then nobody was listening.
Are you optimistic that lessons will be learned from this crisis, and that the next time something happens, it may be with Ebola, it may be with something else, that the world will react differently?
I really wish I could be optimistic, and I'm someone who's much more realistic. For me, the bottom line in terms of doing better the next time around is we're going to need to really honestly answer the question about what has prevented us to answer in a timely fashion. How next time around we can contract the 6 months to 6 days. That's the challenge.
Who needs to do that so that there is a faster reaction next time?
A faster reaction will only happen if there is international political will to respond to it. Because you may get the best surveillance system, the best alert system, but the reality at the end it comes down to, do we want to respond to it or not? And then Ebola, our failure was not a failure of means, it was a failure of political will.
Where does this political will need to come from?
Well, the political will needs to come, first of all, locally. The nation that are affected need to recognize that they have a problem and they need to declare it. And then they realize they cannot cope with it. Then they have to call upon other states to come and help. And so when they do that, the states who are being called upon need to decide to come. And so what happened is there was a huge, I would say, lapse of time between the call and the deployment. And I remember very well because last year in August 2014, I was in the field and it was clear that Liberia would not get through this epidemic without external help. And then President Surry did ask for help, and there was a pledge from the US mid-September, and then it finally rolled into the field at the end of October. So we have to understand that even with good political will, we still have as well the time to deploy that we need to factor in.
And Joanne Liu, president of MSF, will be the guest on Hard Talk on the BBC World Service on Friday. Now, as Joanne mentioned, many have said that the response was too slow. But new research just published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences has used computer modelling to calculate how many cases could have been averted if temporary hospitals and clinics had been built sooner. Their calculation focused on the course of the epidemic in Sierra Leone. On the plus side, they estimate that the supply of some 2,700 additional beds for treatment centres from September 2014 prevented more than 50,000 cases of the disease in the country. John Edmonds is Professor of Infectious Disease Modelling at another school of hygiene and tropical medicine. He told me how much of a difference the provision of beds made.
These were actually temporary hospitals that were put in place, so with all the associated paraphernalia, logistical support attached to them, so this was a big undertaking. And there wasn't just a single type of hospital, if you like, that was put in place. There were similar ones that were put in place that could be built quickly as well. So there's a range of different facilities that were put in place very rapidly in the autumn of last year.
And how did the provision of these beds reduce the spread of the virus so dramatically? Is it just that it's kept people out of the community because they were now in hospital?
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to the summer of last year, the stories of MSF having to turn people away, they were really the only game in town at the time, particularly in Liberia. Their facilities were full and the epidemic had overwhelmed them, and they were having to turn people away and they were staying in the community. And of course, that's very dangerous. It's infectious, so it's bad. And a similar situation was starting to happen elsewhere. And so these beds were built in, well, not just in Sierra Leone, but in the other affected countries as well. We only looked at the affected ones.
Have you been able to assess how much difference the beds made compared with the other sorts of measures that were being taken, such as introducing safe burials, for example?
We can tease out the effect of beds by the use of our mathematical model, and because we have data on the bed availability of beds at different points in time. So we could do that. What we couldn't really do is then tease out the effect of the other interventions, because all these things came as a package of public health interventions, safe burials, trying to get people to adjust their behaviour and so on. We can't estimate the effect of each of those separately because we just don't have the data. But we do have the data on the beds. We can see the effect just of the beds on that side.
And is it possible that having those beds also indirectly led to some of those other measures being able to put in because people were engaging with the community, or they were able to trace the contacts people had had to know whereabouts the disease seemed to be spreading?
Yeah, I'm sure it did help, and I think later people saw that went into treatment centres and came back out of them having survived, and I think that gave them confidence that the facilities were working to some extent, the response was working to some extent. So I think all of these things worked in conjunction to help.
If the beds had arrived earlier, how many more cases and how many more deaths do you think would have been averted?
We calculated that the beds had been in place about a month earlier, and then we could have saved about 12,000 cases. Over the course of the epidemic, because we're moving the intervention earlier, prevent cases that were happening, those cases would have spread to other cases, and those from happening. So all of these are cases that didn't happen in the community.
And so it means tending to be 70% fatal, then that means a lot of lives would have been saved.
So
What are the lessons for the next epidemic? Was the response too slow?
the response was too slow. When the response kicked into gear, it was quite rapid. So the building of these beds in the autumn of last year was done very rapidly. But the response started too slow. It should have started months earlier. And so I think what we need is to be able to respond quicker. These beds were put somewhere off board so that we can respond as fast as possible.
John Edmonds. Now, James, staying with Ebola, there's also been the disturbing case of a British nurse called Pauline Kaffi, who contracted the virus when she was working in a hospital in Sierra Leone and recovered, only to become ill again, raising questions of how long the virus could remain in the body. So, what do we know about how the virus idea that many things can be good for us. We need bacteria in our guts, for example. Now, new research published in Science Translational Medicine has found that the lack of 4 particular bacteria might leave babies more likely to develop asthma. The idea that a certain amount of dirt can actually protect us from disease is known as the hygiene hypothesis.
For example, we know that if you're born by a cesarean section versus vaginal delivery, you have higher rates of asthma. If you have a dog in the house, you have less asthma. If you live on the farm, you have less asthma. If you breastfeed, you have less asthma. Antibiotics in the first year of life really increase your rates of asthma. So there's all these hints they may be playing a role.
Professor Brett Finley from the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, who conducted this new research looking at babies who might be likely to develop asthma and those at lower risk. The study involved analysing the faeces of babies at 2 different ages to see what bacteria they contained.
We measured 3 months of age and 1 year of age, which is obviously very early in
That
life.
river's kind
The
of
problem is
low.
the kids don't get asthma until age 3 to 5. But we had ways of predicting whether the children would get asthma, whether they wheeze, for example, at age 1 year, or if you prick their skin with allergens, they react to these things. And that's a very good predictor of when they get asthma. So we can tell which
Had
kids
that
are going
test.
to get asthma. What we did is we looked at the feces and characterized the microbes that are the feces of these high-risk kids. There was 22 of them versus the others in the 319 that basically were controlled kids would not be so high risk for asthma. And we didn't see any major overall differences, but when we zoomed in at the 3 months,
Wow.
not the 1 year, we found 4 microbes that seem to be lacking in the children that are very high risk for asthma. Bottom line, if you have low levels or none of these bugs, you go into the high risk group, and the kids in that high risk group now have all gone on to get asthma. So these 4 microbes seem to be protective, if you can say that, early in life.
So are you hoping to follow this up with larger studies?
Yes, so there was 319 kids in the study, 22 of them were in the high risk group, and those are the ones that all had the perfect correlation with 4 microbes.
The river is
500
low.
samples from all the kids that are at high risk in this whole study, as well as controls, as well as kids that got asthma from the low risk study. We're doing 100 from Ecuador, of which 30 or so are high risk, and then we're looking at a trial in Australia that has 1,000 kids in it to see if we can look at those. So of course, you're right, the idea is to see how universal is this.
And do we have any idea why that might be? Why would having these 4 microbes help you not to get asthma?
Yeah, so there's not much known about these 4 microbes, and they're just normal residents of the human intestine. But you know that many microbes seem to really influence how our immune system develops, and this happens very early in life. And we think what is happening is these microbes are pushing our immune system to develop in sort of an allergic way or not. And these 4 microbes seem to then push it in a sort of protective way.
So is that happening because these bacteria protect against too much inflammation in the body?
Well, I think what they're doing is they're pushing how our immune system develops into a way that you, as you say, you don't really trigger as much inflammation to normal environmental things, pollens or house dust mites, etc. Things that trigger asthma. We still have to prove this. We have proven in mice, we know that's the case, but not in kids yet. So I think it goes with this whole concept that very early in life, as your body is developing in the first 100 days of your life, these microbes are exerting a huge number of effects on how our body develops, our immune system develops, and also know they impact how our brain develops, and they're playing a key role in us as a biological organism as we develop.
So does that mean that you could in the future do something deliberately to make sure that all newborn babies had this quartet of bacteria?
Yeah, so this opens 2 big doors. First is we can predict whether a child is going to be at risk of asthma early in life at 3 months. And then the second big door that we're really excited about is that opens the door, as you say, to adding these 4 microbes back to children we've identified that are at high risk. So in theory, you can screen kids, say you are at high risk for this, you should have these microbes to decrease asthma. Or say, for example, early in life you have a severe bacterial infection that has to be treated with antibiotics. You can then replenish these good bugs after the antibiotics are done to decrease that kid's risk of going on to asthma. So we put like a probiotic concept where you either squirt these 4 microbes directly in the child's mouth, or there's all these probiotics that women, breastfeeding women, paint on their breasts as a way of inoculating the kids. We can people are doing that. So this is the kinds of experiments we're actually doing right now with animal models.
So it's quite exciting.
It's back to shaping Lyme disease in life, I think, is a whole new way of thinking about asthma.
Now, James, what do you make of the study? It is quite small, isn't it?
It is, but it builds on something that is becoming increasingly convincing that the broader picture on this. So we've known several studies in the past about people growing up on farms having lower rates of asthma, people drink unpasteurised milk having lower rates of asthma, and all the evidence there is pointing towards the bacteria that are present in either the milk or on the farm. So I think this is a very precise answer to what I think a lot of people have been speculating on. I think we know for some time that actually bacteria play a huge role in the setting of the immune system and the development of asthma.
Well, before we go, I want to ask you about an extraordinary study that's going to start in the new year, and they've just announced it. The first clinical trial where fetal stem cells are injected into developing fetuses before they're born in the hope of helping with brittle bone disease. It's a complicated idea with these different fetuses. Can you take us through it?
Shall we just start by explaining what brittle bone disease is? So I was interviewing a 21-year-old. He was born with brittle bone disease. So he was born with broken arms and a fractured spine, and over the course of his 20-odd years he's had 30 fractures in his lifetime. So that's caused by a genetic defect that means your body can't produce the collagen, and collagen is the thing that gives your bones their structure. So without it, something affected, really fragile and break very easily. So these babies and
osteogenesis imperfecta
are going to develop this condition. So the solution is to try to come up with a method of introducing tissue which will grow into healthy bone. And the way that it's been proposed is that you can take fetal stem cells. So these are stem cells that are capable of growing a wide range of other tissues, things like bone and things like muscle, and inject those into a developing fetus that you know is going to get brittle bone disease, and that will, in theory, strengthen their bone and lessen the condition.
So what makes the researchers think that this is going to work?
Well, the team at Sweden's Karolinska Institute who are leading on this have already done it in 2 patients. However, because this is such a variable disease, they can't prove whether it really had any benefit or not, so they now need to do it as part of a formal clinical trial to actually test whether there's going to be a beneficial impact. And by partnering with other hospitals in Europe, including Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, they're going to take 15 children and treat them in the womb, and then again after they're born, with another 15 children, they're going to treat them only after they're born, and they're going to compare those results against children that aren't treated at all.
So how developed will the fetuses in the womb be when they attempt this?
Well, you can't actually detect the condition in the very early stages of pregnancy, so what's going to happen is probably around the 20 to 22nd week is the earliest they would actually be able to get the confirmed testing. So they're aiming to start sometime after then, not too close to the end result. So, probably around that 22 to 36 week period is what they're aiming for. So there's no specific date. It's not like it's that window actually.
And why do they need to use the cells from terminated fetuses, which some people have objections to, rather than using embryonic stem cells?
Embryonic stem cells are too early. They have the potential to go to many different types of tissue. So by using the fetal stem cells, you're already using cells which have slightly gone down the right path. That makes sense. They've already started to choose what their destined cell types are going to be. So these are the ones that if you put them into another fetus will go on and really only home in becoming bone. Of course, using embryos raises the same questions as you do about fetus. I mean, there are ethical concerns and debate on the sources of stem cells.
And how will the cells settle in the right place, even though they don't inject them into a particular part of the fetus?
That's an interesting question, and I don't think anyone precisely knows the answer. What we do know is that these cells are the ones that normally go on to form certain types of tissue, so it would be unusual to find them going off and becoming something else. So that's why they end up honing in on areas like bone.
Fascinating. Thanks very much, James Gallagher. That's it for today. I'm on Twitter at Claudia Hammond. Today's Health Check from the BBC was produced by Andrew Luck-Baker. Next week, a special programme on the controversial American behavioural psychologist. Do join me.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science.